Hey everyone, welcome to, as Caryl just said, the accessibility and web development process presented by Caryl Westenberg from Stanford Web Services. We ask that you please keep your mics muted throughout the presentation. Please type any questions you have during the presentation in the chat. We will make sure to answer them at the end. The session will be recorded and posted to the WebCamp website after the event. I hope you all enjoy.
Thank you, Drake. Really appreciate this. And I do want to comment, I don't see this presentation going necessarily to the end unless we get into a conversation. So if you want to have a question that's timely, feel free to ask it. Okay, so the goal of my current goal in life is to make accessibility a habit. So I'm Caryl Westenberg. I have a CPWA, that's a Certified Professional in Web Accessibility. I'm an accessibility specialist at Stanford Web Services, and I have a plethora of computer software experience. Oh, I have to just call this out. I did some research. This SPADOC was actually a Fortran development, and it was still in use for Cheyenne Mountain in 2021. Go figure. They're still running Fortran. It's still a thing. Okay. So we're going to be talking about accessibility. Let's start out with what is accessibility. In the big picture, it's really a chance for making sure all people of all abilities can perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with a website or web application or anything else you want to talk about. Well, why do we care about this? Well, we can always, this is not working. We can always turn to the legal implications. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but there is a California State Bill 1486 that's been proposed to make it clear that web developers can be sued for their inaccessible creations. That's kind of the stick. So here is the carrot. It's for you. It turns out, I mean, I could go through all sorts of data and say, 20% of people have disabilities. I think what's really interesting is that chances are, if you're lucky enough to get older, you're going to lose some of your sight. You might get hand tremors. You're going to lose some of your hearing. Something like that's going to happen. So as we make our culture more accessible, your future is going to likely be more accessible, and therefore you're doing this for you, making our culture more accessible. So to make this happen, we're finding that the best approach is to shift things left. And I thought Patrice Pelland had a great quote. We need to think about accessibility before we start any of our work, before we write a line of code, at every step in our development cycle. So this is my whale diagram. And this whale diagram is kind of a depiction of what I see the Stanford Web Services development process. We start with an idea over here. We go into pre-discovery, discovery, design, development, all stages of a development. We go to release, site building, launch, do a retrospective, and then maintenance. Each of these blue rectangles, I don't expect you to read this. This is just a visual to get the idea. Each one of these rectangles depicts a concept that's associated with that stage with regard to accessibility. So for example, when you get your idea for a project, who is your audience? If it's the public, you'll want to think about making it accessible. If it's an API, for example, is it transmitting HTML? And you want to make sure that HTML doesn't lose its doesn't get stripped and lose its accessibility affordances, such as like headings or other list structures, other semantic HTML. So even if it is code, you still may have an accessibility requirement. And then going through, you have your budget. You want to design for accessibility. At your release, you want to verify it. During site building, you want your editor to be aware of accessibility. In maintenance, you want to be monitoring for accessibility to see if anything changes. So this is a linear view of that same diagram of the Stanford's web development process. For purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on the design, the development, and release portions of our development process. So let's start with for each stage, what we want to consider is who are the stakeholders and how do I reach every stakeholder? Well, who are the stakeholders? Stakeholder is anyone with an interest in or is affected by the work being done. And this can range from your users, your team members, and your clients. Okay, story time. I figure the best way to get this idea across is to tell a story. And we have a client that comes to us and say, hey, we've got important problems that we are solving and we want to tell the whole world about this. Let's put this on our website as news. Okay, the idea, publish news on the website. Who's the news for? The public. How do I reach them? Yeah, build a website that's accessible. Okay, who is the public? And the public includes people with disabilities. And your disabilities are, your auditory, your cognitive issues, neurological issues, such as dyslexia, physical issues like hand tremors, speech. You want to make, if you're navigating by speech, you want to be able to target something on the website easily. And of course, visual, when you look at screen readers and that sort of thing. So starting off with UX and design. When a designer is looking at a website or designing a website, they should hold in the picture, of course, how visually that website should look. Additionally, they need to hold the big picture of how that website functions and appears to somebody with disabilities. And the designer is going to use the designs to relay that information to the developers and other stakeholders. So it's time to design. Who do you consider when creating your designs? Your client, the public, and your developers. And how are these designs important to each? Well, the client, you want to satisfy their requirements. The public, you want to make sure that everybody in the public can access all and interact with all features equivalently. And for your developers, you want to make sure that the designs communicate functionality, but also you want not everything can be communicated through the written word, that you can facilitate a collaboration with developers, realizing that there could be some back and forth with a design based on what the developers can produce, given time and budget. And then you want to use annotations to clarify accessibility. This is what we want to design. This is our news list. It starts with a heading. It has some subheadings. It has a date. It has a description and some categories. So we want to annotate this design for cognitive disabilities. And one of those things is to have a logical heading structure. So it turns out that we want to put this component on an existing web page. That web page has an existing H1. So this news list should start with a title of an H2. So that means that the subheading should have an H3, the title of your news item. And so should this title of your news item. It should have an H3. Okay, now we want to define the logical reading order. When I look at this news item, I can see that my eye drifts towards the future of immigration, which is the title of the news item. So I want that to be first in my reading order. Now my eye will probably drift up to the January 25th as the next thing I look at. So we want that to be second. I'll read the description third, and then onto the categories fourth. We want so when it comes to the HTML, we want the HTML to reflect the design in this order, and then use CSS to change the order. Now, what I've done is I put together a list of resources that I have developed. I'll give you. I also have a Google Doc that has these links as well. But I wanted to call out this one thing is an accessibility toolkit. This is by Indeed, and this is where I first learned about annotations, and I just love the way they've approached this. There's Figma is coming, or no, Axe is coming up, has their accessibility tool annotator for Figma. This one is pretty self-explanatory. It's not that you necessarily need to use it, but it provides some really great concepts. So for example, here you can see that you can place these annotations to indicate this is an H1, H2, etc. And you can define your menu order. You can define more information about a form. And then here's the reading order, how to think about that. I really like what they've done with it. Something to consider or emulate when it comes to annotating designs. Okay, we're done with designs. Let's write some code. So once again, who do you consider when you're developing code? You want to consider your client, public, designer, the content editor, and other developers. Well, how is this code important to each? With the client, again, you want to satisfy their requirements. With the public, you want to make sure that all members of the public can interact with your functionality equivalently. The designer, you want to make sure that your designs meet the requirements of the design. Content editor, that when this rolls out to the content editor, they're putting their content in there, they know how to create accessible content. And then for other developers, when you write your code, you want to make sure that it's developed following best practices. Okay, let's start out with things to consider when developing for the public. One is to use semantic HTML. That's headings, use landmarks like articles, make sure you use a label or a heading or it shows up. You use lists when you've got list content. Lists are wonderful because it tells you how many items are on the list, that sort of thing. You want to verify color contrast. Yes, the designer was supposed to define the color contrast and make sure it's going to work. Sometimes they don't see everything, so you want to double check that. You're using the semantic HTML. You want to make sure that it's valid. And then you want to structure things with HTML using a logical reading order, but then use CSS to rearrange the visual reading order to how the designs look. Okay, we got this is our code that we're going to produce. So this is the HTML. We got this title for our news list as an H2. Yep, we got this text here as a paragraph. Great. Oh, look, this starts in a list. So we have unordered list. We start with an article. That tells us that this is like a self-contained unit of content. The article has a header. It has an H3 in it with the title of the news item. You've got your description. You close your header. Then you have a list of categories. Close the article and so on. So now the developers want to make sure this code is developed for other developers. So you want to use linters. There are linters out there that will test for accessibility. You also want to, once it's rendered code, you want to test that rendered code for accessibility. You want to start with automated testing. Again, you want to check your HTML validation, color contrast checkers, and your accessibility checkers. You want to do manual testing. Now, manual testing sounds really scary, and it can be, especially running a screen reader, because honestly, running a screen reader is really intimidating because it yells at you in this funny voice, and it's hard to understand, and it's kind of robotic and scary. At least what you can do is use your keyboard. You go in and use your tab key and go from one item to the next and make sure that you can interact with everything in your form. You can reach it, that you can see the focus on each item. And then when you're developing for developers, you want to make sure that you have a second set of eyes. And in Stanford Web Services, we use pull requests. So once you develop your code, you hand it off to a developer. The developer looks at it, makes sure that there's a sanity check, make sure you followed best practices, you didn't miss something, that sort of thing. And then they merge it in to the body of the code. Again, these are resources I've pulled together for code and test. For instance, we have conventions that I've written up in our developer guide. We have a pull request template that includes reminders to check for accessibility. This is a component checklist I'm developing for Stanford. It's not quite ready for public use. And then you want to, different resources for testing. And then you want to, we use Cite Improve and we track those results over time. Okay, now you're developing for designers. You make sure that you want to collaborate with your designers. You want to ensure that you've got proper functionalities. You've got the right headings, the right reading order. Ensure you've got the expected look and feel from your designs. And then if you encounter things that are maybe too difficult to implement or don't make sense, that you work with your designer to figure out, maybe another approach. And then developers writing for content editors, there's things to consider when developing for content editors. So when you produce, when a content editor gets in there and is producing content that it's easy to use and intuitive, that any more interesting, shall we say, functionality is available in help text, is explained through help text or in your user guide, and that if there's accessibility considerations, you want to make sure that your content editor needs to know that that's made clear, and then document any known issues or problems. So if you can't make this accessible, you need to let the editor know that they need to take a different approach. And then your developers want to design these are resources for developing for content editors. This is in our user guide. There's accessibility commitment. As a content editor, we are committed to developing for accessibility. We have developed an approach for capturing site ownership information. This includes who to contact if we discover accessibility issues on your site. I have a page on how to fix issues using Cite Improve that we've discovered for Stanford sites. And then how to do accessibility testing for content editors. And then some resources for when you do code and release and launch. You want to scan your whole site. At least if you can't do it before launch, right after launch, and make sure that you've caught any accessibility issues. If you did, you want to track those and make sure that they get addressed. I have developed a bug report ticket template that I use when I create bug reports when I find accessibility issues or other issues. I have a link to that there. We can jump into it later if you like. But one thing I wanted to call out was when we track issues over time. Now, this is, I capture this from our Site Improve reports. And I put a date on it when I capture it. It's usually, I try to capture it after a release. Site Improve takes about a week to make sure that it's scanned your whole site. So this is like a week after a release. And this is kind of I found this interesting, is that this issue, is it clear which page element has focus from the keyboard? AA issue at one point. Well, some issues are not an issue because the way Site Improve can't see things. But you'll notice that at one point we had 52 issues. We knocked it down to 12, but then a week later we came up to 94. And I was using this approach, I was able to detect that there was a bug that was introduced. We addressed it and then moved on. But this is a great way to track accessibility issues. Okay. A bit of a review of the presentation. For a website to be accessible for each phase of the development process, we really want to consider who are the stakeholders and how do I reach each of the stakeholders. Our web development process starts with the idea, goes through development, and ends in maintenance. So I want to open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? You want me to go into more details on anything? If not, I'm going to Christian, you have anything?
No, I just, well, actually, it was kind of interesting. I don't know why I didn't know it before, but when you were saying the visual order isn't necessarily the same as the markup order for accessibility. I mean, we've done that before for other reasons or whatever, but yeah, my guess is that's probably not something most developers would even think of for accessibility reasons anyway.
Yeah, so what happens is people will navigate by links or headings, right? So you come into a page. Actually, I might back up and go through this. This is, I think, really important. A concept to really understand. Let's see. Where are you? Okay, here. So if okay, this is a link and a heading. So if I navigate by headings, for example, I would drop into here on an H2. I would start reading from here, and then I would reach this date here. And so all of a sudden I'm thinking the Future of Immigration was published on July 12th, 2021. But it wasn't. It was published on January 25th, 2024. And that July 12th, 2021 was actually the next article. So that is really an important thing to be aware of when you're developing your page, is that that the reading order is what you expect, and it may not be the visual order. Thank you, Kristen. That's a big concept I've been trying to get out there. In our, going to roll forward for a minute.
There is one from Carson in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, do you have any recommendations for checking accessibility in the CI/CD process? Is Carson's question.
Okay. In code, there's quite a few. I'm going to jump into here. This is a document it's linked to from my presentation. Let me see. There are a few things that you can include in your your process that I think it's Pally. I can't type. Or Sally, one of the two. I think this one would allows you to let's run down, scroll down. Yeah, it has a command line interface, so you can actually include it in a CI process. And your configure, what is it? Continuous integration, continuous delivery process. So this is one example. I think there's more, but I believe that Pally is built on Axe, and Axe is one of the, Axe is put out by DQ, which is one of the leaders in accessibility testing and education. So it's a fairly good engine underneath of it. Thanks for that question. And thank you, Yvonne, for typing that in. One thing I was thinking of jumping in to was something I've put together recently is when you come up with a menu is actually very challenging to define. And this is one way to think about how to work with a menu. Because within a menu, you have default, you have hover, focus, visited state, active. Does it point to an external link? Maybe they link to another thing. Does it have, you have default, if you have a drop down, if it's open or closed, how is that going to be defined? And so this is kind of using this grid, it's your matrix, you can say, okay, for top level menu items, you want to define a default state. You define a hover state with an underline. Focus state has an underline. You visited, you decided not to check, which I have mixed feelings on visited state. For somebody who has cognitive issues, it's really helpful to have a visual visited state that allows you to know that you've already been to that page. But for security reasons, you may not want people to know where you've been, so you don't want to have that visited state. So you figure out what you want is best for your audience, but there are implications with visited. So, okay, anyways, going back, you've got an active state, maybe you have a gray bar for active, and then when if it's active, you have a menu indicator that points up. When it's closed, it points down. Default, when it's open, it points up, but it's not active at that point. So defining all the states, and when you think about when you define things for development, this is an approach that allows the designer to make sure that you've checked all the boxes, shall we say. There's a lot of boxes for designing various interactive elements on your website. Let me think, what else? So, Kristen, to go a little bit further on your discussion about order, I've actually put together a couple examples of how to, some code examples on our dev guide. This is our Stanford Web Services developer guide. And so I've actually put in a code pen how this might look. So your HTML is pretty straightforward. It starts with a list item, an article, a header, on so forth. But the CSS, well, I thought I had examples of this. And then anyways, the CSS is in here to show how you might change this up so that it is in the order that you visually want to see it versus reading order. Yeah, and then, yeah, I've been putting together these examples for our developers so then I can then point to them and say, hey, this is how we want to see things. Yeah, and encourage you to take a look at some of these. We still have some time. Any other comments or questions or thoughts? Oh, thanks for the plugin, Yvonne. You want to talk about it for a second? How you've used it?
The Netlify one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we have some sites on Netlify. I don't think we have enabled it on our sites now, but definitely have used it before. And then it does work pretty well, although because it is based on the Google Lighthouse, so their accessibility scan is not complete. So it only take care of some of the more obvious things, and then like as Caryl would recommend, like for complete accessibility, like a test, you have to probably do a lot of manual testing still, unfortunately. But at least it covered the basics. So and it was really easy to set up.
Thank you, Yvonne. I do want to comment on that too, is that each vendor develops a rule set that they implement, right? And to check the WCAG rules, the success criteria. And each, this is an ongoing process for them too. So one developer might check one rule and another developer might check another. When I'm looking to show an example of how to recreate an issue, I will go through 2 or 3 of these tools to find out a tool that will demonstrate where this is an issue. So on the developer end, it's always good to check, multiple tools because they do have different rule sets and they're all important. So site improve, I'll flag something in site improve, but then I want to make it easy for the developer to not, because site improve has a 1-week turnaround. So if you make a change on the site, you need to be able to check it more frequently than once a week. So that's why I'll go through various tools until I find one that will bring up that issue and at a more comfortable rate of iteration. Any other tools that anybody else out here likes or suggests or doesn't like?
I've used some just in the like when I have Drupal sites, that'll flag stuff. I was
Like the editorially?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, does your team use any of those tools?
Yeah, we do. We have that on the editing side. So what happens with editorially is that once you log into the site, you can see it'll flag a set of accessibility issues on the site. And so and it has a little widget you can go through and check each one. And that is great because as a content editor, you can see where you might have accessibility issues. Really like that one. Is there another one that you use, Kristen?
That's the one I've used most recently. Yeah, I feel like I have in the past, but you know what? They may have been browser plugins, so I'm not sure if they were actually Drupal plugins.
Yeah. What browser plugins do you turn to?
Well, I had used Axe in the past, but that was I really like that editorially, and I'm mostly on Drupal sites, so
Right.
if I have access, then that one works well for me.
Yeah. Anybody else have a tool they like? Carson?
Oh, we use
I also use.
Oh, sorry. Hang on, Yvonne. Carson, you use Site Improve?
Yeah, UC Davis, we have a contract with them.
How do you like using it?
It's okay.
The turnaround for us, for me, is a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it takes a while.
And that's why I have a whole pocket full of accessibility tools that I use. I do have a list here.
I actually have a question on that I don't know how to say this, editorially.
Yeah.
Does that work with with CK Editor 5?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're using it now.
Thank you.
So let's see. Here on this page, this is on our developer guide again. Here's a list of some of the tools that I tend to go to. I found this one was interesting, that IBM's, it's a little bit challenging to figure out, but you can actually come up with what the reading order is, which is kind of a nice thing to be able to, say. So when you're trying to document, hey, this is an issue, and give it to a developer, this is a tool that you can use and just do a quick screenshot of, hey, I'd like to see it go in a different order. Oh, let's see. Here's the tools that you can use for development. Again, Yvonne mentioned Lighthouse, Axe Core. I'm not sure if that's if that one's paid or no, it's open source. So you can actually run Axe Core as well, which is going to be a great, they have a great tool, and they have great support because it is done through DQ. And then linters, here's a couple of linters. They'll plug into Visual Studio. And my favorite contrast checker is this WCAG contrast checker. That would be I like this one because you can tell it tells you the contrast, and it also has on your page, and then allows you to click to the various places on your page where it's seeing these things. It also has a color picker so that you can then makes it easier to find out, okay, what like what is this line? Is that bold enough for somebody with a low vision to be able to see it? Okay, anybody else have any questions, any favorite tools that come to mind?
Can you throw the link to that area?
Into Slack, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give you this, and then I'll put this in meeting chat. This is my link to my presentation, and then this is linked to my favorite resources. And I intend to keep this up to date every time I do a presentation or something. So, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your contributing to the conversation, who everybody did, and listening to what I had to say. And I look forward to seeing you at a session near you.
Thank you so much. This was very helpful.
Yay. That's what I want to hear.
Thank you, Caryl.
You're welcome.